Good evening, everyone. Matt Fisher tells me that he's just seen a news flash that Disney's closed down its Metaverse department, so we could probably all go home anyway. But in the event you want to know what would have happened if Disney hadn't done it, we have a wonderful panel. Colin Burse is in charge, and I'm getting out of the way, but welcome to UCL. And for you, many of you, welcome again.
Right.
You're on your way.
Well, thanks very much, Robin. It's a real pleasure to be here again in UCL. Welcome, everybody. Welcome those online. I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but I'm told there's roughly the same number of people online as there are in this room, so that's a great audience. We're here to talk about IP and the Metaverse. We're going to debate questions like, how well is the current IP framework suited to the virtual meta age? If you know what all the words in that sentence mean, you're doing better than me. Who adapts, IP law or the Metaverse? Where does infringement take place? Can you tax it? But most interestingly, we have a really great panel of speakers. We've got Stephen Hughes. He's a UCL person, works in the science and technology studies area. He's going to tell us about the Metaverse, and he has a particular interest in conspiracy theories and how that fits in. So, and Stephen, I can tell you, he is the man to find out what's really going on. And so we'll look forward to hearing what he has to say. And then Michaela MacDonald is from Queen Mary. Now, she's in the Electronic Engineering and Computer Science department and is an interactive entertainment law scholar. I was trying to work out which of those words is an adjective and which of those is a noun, but that sounds like a really far more interesting job than mine, I've got to tell you. And she's also been working with the IPO, the UK IPO on IP in the Metaverse, but unfortunately that work hasn't, I think that's right, it's not published yet, is it?
That's correct.
But still, Michaela's got a lot of interesting things to explain to us about the characteristics of the Metaverse and how IP fits into that, so we'll look forward to hearing that. Yes, and then online, we have Daria Fursava. She has the coolest job here by a mile. She works for a company that does online gaming called War Gaming. That's the name of the company, not the name of the games. And they have games which I want to play. World of Tanks, World of Warships. You're getting a clue on the name of the games. But she's going to explain from a war gaming, video gaming perspective where the Metaverse fits in. She's going to talk about UGC. Hands up, who knows what UGC is? I see you're better than me. I had to Google it, but I now know it's user-generated content. So there you go. That's and how that fits in with the discussion. And then finally, Tom Grogan. Now, Tom Grogan is the CEO of MRDCX Tech, which is too many letters. Does anybody know who MRDCX Tech is really? The MRD is Mishcon Derea. So he's a tech consultant and is going to explain how that all fits in with his work. He's obviously a real techie expert, doesn't just know about the Metaverse, but that's what we're going to quiz him about this evening. But he also knows about AI, the blockchain, and other good stuff. So I'm going to get him to come and write my judgments for me with ChatGPT. What he will focus on is fashion, taking fashion as a use case for the Metaverse and how some of the problems that the fashion area will have in this space. So that's our program. I hope you'll find it interesting. I know I will. Before I hand you over, I just have a couple of things to say. First of all, I've got a confession to make, and I'm hoping that the people who are coming in here won't hear my confession, but I think that they've arrived now. My confession is this: let me take you back to the 1970s. Colin was a 13-year-old Scottish boy, that's me, and I used to play a game with my friends. They were all boys, it's fair to say, and it was on rainy days in Scotland, and we played in the Metaverse. It wasn't called the Metaverse in those days, it was called Dungeons and Dragons. And for those young enough to have not seen Stranger Things, Dungeons and Dragons is basically the Metaverse without a computer. You just do it all in your head. You have characters, you have places, and that's how it all works. Now, but the thing is that unbeknownst to me at the time, we were creating serious intellectual property problems, which we're going to discuss the solutions to this evening, 40 years later. One problem was this: in my bedroom, I had a cardboard box which we'd got from a local supermarket one day when we'd got lots of stuff. And it was a box which originally contained pre-rolled pastry that you can buy in a supermarket. And we named the city that our Dungeons and Dragons was set in after the word on this box. So we used to play our game with our wizards and our swords and all this nonsense in a city called Jusrol. Jusrol. We didn't even know what it meant. But if we did that today in the metaverse, I think we'd get a nasty letter from Mishcon de Reya, probably. One of my friends had a character who was a wizard. And this friend is now the head of the Eastern Hemisphere for British Petroleum, so he's done all right for himself. But his dad was a dentist, and in order to give this wizard a name, we named his wizard after a well-known brand of toothpaste. It's absolutely true, this. So the wizard was called Colgate. So for years, we played Dungeons and Dragons with a wizard called Colgate. And we didn't get any nasty letters from a fast-moving consumer goods company. But I bet you if I called my wizard Colgate on World of Warcraft, I'd hit some exception. Somebody would start sending me nasty emails. So these problems of IP in the metaverse are not as new as you might have thought. Couple more questions. We know what the metaverse is, or we're going to find out this evening, but what do we call this as a distinction from the metaverse? Is this the real verse? If we can do one thing this evening, we've got to think of a good name for this bit. Somebody told me it was the universe, but we're at UCL, so I don't know if it's the UCL universe or something like that. Finally, please help me with this one. In the metaverse, can we please not have to wear those silly goggles? That's the last thing I want to leave you with, is a thought that whatever we end up with in this metaverse, I don't want to have to wander around wearing VR goggles. There's got to be a better way than that. So I hope we find a solution to that problem. But without further ado, I'll ask Stephen to make his speech. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Stephen, and I am a lecturer at the Department of Science and Technology Studies here at UCL. And I study science, technology, society, the relationships between them, particularly uncomfortable and difficult relationships. So I'm really interested in controversies, conspiracies, misinformation, these types of things. And I think that virtual reality, the metaverse, is a prime site for thinking about some of these issues. And I'm really fascinated by it. So I'm going to give you a really dumbed down introduction to what the metaverse is, just to start. So it's lots of different things. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be one platform that is interoperable, that integrates lots of different platforms. But the problem is there's no centrally agreed definition on what that platform is, what it will look like, what it will do. It typically involves technologies like virtual reality, which we might think of as being a persistent virtual world that exists alongside our own, and that we can tap into it using various devices like those VR goggles and headsets. Augmented reality, extended reality, mixed reality, all of these different ways that we can project graphics onto the world and that we can interact with. There are games that are examples of the metaverse, like Roblox, like Fortnite, which people can dip into, dip out of, but that is kind of existing all the time. It's that idea of it being this persistent virtual world. It can be a digital marketplace. It can be loads and loads of different things. There are lots of different companies that are looking to become, part of the metaverse, like Microsoft, obviously Meta. Here we can see this GIF here, where Meta, which used to be called Facebook, says that the metaverse is going to be the next evolution in social connection and the successor to the mobile internet. So there are loads and loads of different ideas about what this kind of nebulous technology, platform, space is going to be. But let's have a look at some of the hype. So we have here Tim Sweeney, who's the CEO of Epic Games, the creator of Fortnite, the creator of Unreal Engine, that lots of other games have been developed on. And he says that the metaverse is going to be far more pervasive and powerful than anything else. If one central company gains control of this, they will become more powerful than any government and be a god on earth. Okay, some big words. Matthew Ball, he's a commentator, he's a venture capitalist, has written a book on the metaverse, and he says, I hope to help you understand what's required to realize the metaverse, why entire generations will eventually move to and live inside it, and how it will forever alter our daily lives, our work, and how we think. So we're seeing lots of big talk about the metaverse, and you've probably come across it. And it's really strange because at the same time, we're seeing a lot of talk demolishing it and belittling it and saying, this is complete rubbish, this is never going to go anywhere. So there's a huge tension at the heart of this. I'm going to show a little clip here. And I want you to think that not everyone is as happy and as excited as Tim Sweeney and Matthew Ball when we think about the metaverse.
You can't mention simulation theory without mentioning the Matrix movies.
People were going crazy over it. The Matrix was real.
We are living in a simulation. We are being inhabited by some sort of player.
It's a game.
A world without rules and control.
What's the point of all this?
Everyone is fake.
I am not a body at all. I am the code. I am a string of numbers constantly replicating in some vibration.
None of this is real.
I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see.
Okay, so this is a clip from trailer for this movie called, it's a documentary called A Glitch in the Matrix, which investigates people who believe that we live in a simulation. That, I don't know if any of you have heard the movie The Matrix, essentially that the Matrix is real. And there are many people who believe this, this conspiracy theory. The idea that either we already live in a simulation, in a virtual realm, or that we are on the way to existing in this Matrix-like virtual world where we will be controlled by unknown malevolent rulers. And my question is, what is going on here? What is it that is convincing otherwise perfectly rational people to believe what sound like completely irrational stories or ideas? And moreover, I'm interested in what it tells us about some of the social and ethical issues raised by the metaverse. So my background isn't in law, my background is in social science. So I kind of think about some of these issues maybe before they become law or before they become formalized in other ways. So let's think a little bit about what conspiracy theories are. I think that they reveal deeper social tensions. I think they're at the extreme end of some social discomfort around developments in science and technology. Todor Haristov describes them as an attempt to overcome the anxiety and discomfort that are caused by alienation, uncertainty, and powerlessness. And we can think about new technologies as creating that for people. The relationship between science and society, technology and society, isn't a very smooth one. We live in an increasingly unstable planet as a result of industrialization, result of climate change. We have mass pollution and species extinctions. There's the threat of total annihilation through nuclear weapons. And then, of course, there's staggering inequality and inequality of access to new technologies or even to basic technologies like healthcare, food, water, and housing. So technology brings us a lot of good, but it can also create a lot of problems. And I'm interested in how conspiracy theories articulate some of these problems. So this is from David Icke's website, a forum on David Icke, very famous conspiracy theorist, where this person, Michael, describes some of the frustrations that they have around technology and why conspiracy theories speak to those. Michael says, every year that goes by, technology is pushed faster and faster. No one really asks what for. They just think it's good that it does. Faster internet speed for what? They say technology gives you more time, which in reality is the exact opposite. You have less time. They say social media brings people together. In reality, it drives people apart as they become less connected in real life. So my suggestion is, rather than dismissing conspiracy theories, we can consider the underlying social tensions that they are articulating. And these tensions include alienation, powerlessness, uncertainty, and mistrust. So being alienated from society and the stories that we tell ourselves as being part of a society. So we're told that we're citizens, that we are equal, that we have power, that we can decide the future. A lot of people, that doesn't match their experience. They feel that that narrative doesn't really tell the story of their lives. People have questions about claims that people like Mark Zuckerberg can make. You know, who voted for this next evolution in social connection? Has Meta, for example, done a great job with social connection up until this point? How can we democratically raise questions about that? There's a loss of meaning more generally as people interact with new forms of technology, questions around freedom, democracy, and then of course, when people encounter these conspiracy theories and narratives, they seem to be more plausible than the stories that they're receiving. So this is my last slide here. Some of the tensions and questions that I think that we can identify when we think about conspiracy theories and what these concerns and fears raise are basic questions like, could these resources be better spent elsewhere? So Facebook reportedly have invested 36 billion in the metaverse for advancements in healthcare, education. What could that 36 billion have done for education and healthcare if spent in other ways? Should a private company be making those kinds of decisions and organizing those resources or ordering the priorities? Has Meta taken responsibility for past impacts of social connection, impacts in elections, distribution of harmful images, carbon output? Can we trust Meta to govern from within? And fundamentally, is it undemocratic for a private technology company to decide and shape the future of connection? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. We'll do questions at the end, so save up your questions when Stephen will explain to us how we're going to stop everybody from monopolizing all our ways of thought. And meanwhile, Michaela.
Just testing this works. Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And thank you, Stephen, for a fascinating introduction to what the metaverse is, what it may be, what it shouldn't be, which I think reflects on an important point that our perceptions, our attitudes, whether we trust something and how we would like to use it, reflects or stems from our understanding what it actually is. What does a certain concept represent? What does it entail? How is it going to impact on our lives, on our identities going forward? And I think in the context of metaverse, we have to contend with these different perceptions put forward. One of them is the vision of the metaverse, the kind of dreaming of what this new dimension or ecosystem, entire new environment, what it can deliver for us. Then we have the kind of hype of the metaverse, a sort of marketing put forward by companies like Meta. The things that they want to sell us, that they want to persuade us that we actually want, that we think is desirable. And then we have the reality, the actual on-the-ground reality, the products and services that we will be using, consuming, experiencing, and whether they are feasible. And I wonder how these three areas actually overlap, especially at the moment. What are the tensions between the possible, the desirable, and the feasible? Bringing it back to the specific focus of today's panel, I think we need to be asking what whatever vision or form or shape of metaverse we actually going to get and inhabit in one way or another is going to shape IP, and equally importantly, how IP is going to shape that version of metaverse. What I'm going to talk about today a little bit is reflecting on a report commissioned by the UK IPO that I have co-authored with Dr. Gaetano De Mita, Dr. Ian Harn-Lee, that I'm seeing in the audience, an amazing team of research assistants, Anthony, Tay, and Zeynep. The report focused on identifying issues rising from intellectual property legal systems, specifically in the UK, but also looking beyond that, and how these need to be considered in developing different policies and strategies that will enable and facilitate the metaverse at the end of the day. Coming back to understanding or trying to define the metaverse, as Stephen already said, metaverse can be many things all at once. And it very much depends on the perspective from which you are looking at it, and the sort of spectrum of different positions and views and the shape or form of metaverse. So rather than trying to come up with a workable, technologically neutral definition ourselves, after reviewing tens of different definitions of what the metaverse is and what it isn't, we decided that the best approach is to identify the common characteristics emerging from these different definitions and positions, and really focus on those that will have the most impact on IP. And these characteristics would be interoperability, decentralization, centralization, convergence of physical and digital spaces, and multiple contributors. So these characteristics, together with any associated technology or part of the infrastructure that will deliver metaverse to us, we believe will inform the kind of issues and challenges linked to intellectual property rights, and where the main scope of the report. Indeed, whether we will all be wearing VR headsets in our houses and in public is something we shall see, but given that this hasn't really happened during lockdown, I doubt that we will see that anytime soon, but who knows. Another thing that has already been mentioned today is that many of the issues you can think of aren't new. Indeed, dating back to the 70s, to real physical world potentially. And a lot of the existing research into metaverse and IP and the relationship between these two almost sidesteps identifying any of these issues. It doesn't even mention them because it assumes, well, it's nothing particularly new. We link these or group these issues into part of the report, which is called Persisting and Existing Issues, precisely because they are not new. However, many of these haven't actually been resolved. In 2-3 decades, we've been dealing with these issues. We do not have necessarily a satisfactory answer. For instance, thinking about copyright, specifically the scope of subject matter, exclusive rights, limitations and exceptions when applied to a sort of evolution of early online multiplayer games to open worlds such as Second Life and EVE Online, to today modern complex digital video games and platforms. We still have questions that we haven't dealt with. What is the precise scope of protection when thinking about video games per se and its constituent elements? I'm mentioning video games because of the link in terms of evolution of where the metaverse is headed and what it is building on. And as we will hear from Daria after me, there is a lot to learn from video games and interactive entertainment law in this concern. thinking about territoriality and jurisdiction and the lack of it in digital environments. How do you address the fact that all intellectual property rights are territorial, whereas the space in which they are being used, operate, and the kind of interactions that facilitate is not, and it lacks any territorial boundaries. What about enforcement and the issues in terms of detection of any potential infringing users? And also the fact that a lot of infringing or potentially infringing users, such as user-generated content, exist in an entirely gray area where they are being anything between being encouraged to being tolerated to, on occasion, being banned and labeled as undesirable, but not necessarily because of intellectual property rights per se, but more because of the overarching business strategy of the right holder. Similar issues when thinking about trademarks. How do you deal with the fact that trademarks are enforcing rights with regards to goods and services in the course of trade, again, in specific territory, and this being translated to virtual goods, potentially virtual services, in a borderless environment where right holders of similar marks can actually meet in the same space, whereas before that wouldn't be possible. We still haven't successfully addressed the issue of virtual or digital ownership, or rather the lack of it, despite there being increasing attempts to do that and to come up with a workable solution. Just to name an example, the recent Law Commission's report on digital assets and proposal introducing a third category of property to address that. We don't have time to go to details, but some of these issues have persisted for decades, and rather than being dealt with, they are simply on the back burner. They may be tolerated, especially with regards to the right holders, and when it comes to the users, they often operate in very gray, legally uncertain area. But Metaverse is putting a lot of these questions to the forefront. The whole idea of Metaverse evolves around an economy focused on the user, on user-generated content, on a number of different microtransactions taking place. However, some of these issues that are becoming or presenting themselves as new, as anticipated new issues, are linked to some of the characteristics that I mentioned earlier. In terms of interoperability, this concept means that you will be able basically to move seamlessly from one aspect of the environment to the other under one virtual identity, with all your virtual currency, tokens, assets, interactions, history will travel with you. At the moment, that is not possible because all the assets, all the content, all the accounts associated with users exist in locked ecosystems, and they are underpinned by intellectual property rights. So it is not possible for me to take all my currency and assets from Fortnite and move them seamlessly to Roblox. I cannot take my entire Twitter account and take it to Mastodon with all my followers, with all my tweets, with all my history. It is not possible because it is linked specifically to proprietary rights within locked ecosystem. And Metaverse promises to change that. But interoperability, therefore, would have to exist on the level of not just the infrastructure and interoperable standards, but also with regards to the content and the associated licenses. And that in itself, and on its own, already poses a significant problem. Decentralized regulation and new forms of governance. Again, there is a danger that technology will be sort of the main vehicle in terms of regulating users, especially users' behavior, underpinning variety of transactions and interactions, rather than reverting to legal mechanism. So we should be wary on how we can facilitate that on the basis of existing legal framework to ensure that rights, especially users' rights and freedoms, are protected, that we are not automating transactions and interactions at the expense of sort of protected legal spaces. Convergence of digital and physical. This is a prediction that the boundary between the digital world and the physical world will simply ceases to exist on the basis of different technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. There will be no difference between physical and digital environment. Again, from the point of IP, this collision of two different worlds that don't necessarily have to traditionally be considered at the same time will pose a significant problem. Last but not least, computational creativity will be something that will be powering the creation of the metaverse. Generative AI, which is making a splash in the news in the last few months. There's at least one article on ChatGPT, if not more, and further iterations. Despite the fact that obviously the technology itself is progressing and shows more and more promising results, they are still full of errors, inaccuracies. They lack sort of common sense, ability of abstraction, reasoning, and other common parts of human intelligence. Again, they tend to exacerbate our prejudices, biases, and I think there is a real danger than rather than living in this brilliant future that is being promised to us, whether it's whichever version of the metaverse it is, we might actually be trapped in our horrible, miserable past, because the AI will be simply regenerating existing content and just keep delivering it to us for consumption. So I think that is one great limitation in terms of what is, again, possible and desirable in the form of metaverse. And also, from the IP perspective, questions in terms of authorship, ownership, still remain unsolved with regards to computational creativity, and potentially the need to revisit what we consider human creativity that is protected by copyright in the light of an alternative source of creative content that can completely obliterate our ability to create anything ever again. This is my last slide. I think what has emerged from our research is that whatever version of metaverse we will inhabit, there is certainly going to be something called the metaverse. It might have already arrived. Roblox, Fortnite, and other types of video games and platforms may already qualify as proto-metaverses. I'm sure we could be here whole evening discussing whether that is true or not. In addition, IP law will be absolutely crucial in delivering whatever version it is. It will be vital in the creation, constitution, and experience of that particular environment or ecosystem. And irrespective of the definition that we will settle on or the form, IP will be in much greater demand, in much greater use, And there's also going to be an increased risk of infringement when it comes to IP. Change in direction when it comes to developing successful enforcement strategies for right holders within Metaverse. I think it's also very clear that the relationship to IP in Metaverse will differ very much for users and citizens, digital citizens, and the right holders themselves. And I think that's the kind of final question that I want to pose, and I think it's really important to continue to have this conversation, is whether IP can be the guarantee of creativity and freedom, again, for us as digital citizens, or it will be more of a path to digital dominance and servitude. And I do hope that IP is one way to ensure that the metaverse we will build and we will inhabit is going to be a human-centric metaverse, something that's built for us, with us in mind. And with that, hopefully hopeful message, I'm going to stop and hand over to Daria. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Michaela, thank you for that. I'm glad you finished on an upbeat note. I was getting a bit worried. It was looking a bit gloomy. So now we've got Daria online. So over to you.
Yep. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Daria Firsova. I'm the head of the Intellectual Property Department at Wargaming. Thank you very much for the invitation. Very sad not to be in person with you. I'm in Cyprus now, much warmer here, but unfortunately 2 hours later. Thank you very much to Colin, Stephen, and Michaela for very thought-provoking speeches. And going back to Wargaming. So we produce World of Tanks and World of Warships video games. These are multiplayer online video games, so many people simultaneously play together online, which is exactly the type of video games which is often considered to be a potential prototype for the metaverse, if we come there. So I've been working at Wargaming for 10 years, and just during this period of time, we faced a lot of legal challenges. The mentioned UGC, governing documents for video games, use of real-world objects within video games, protection of minors, data privacy, many areas, and issues in some of them have been sorted out. But as Michaela mentioned, many of those questions are not yet solved. And there is a very good reason to believe that when we move from where we are now to Metaverse, the problems that we have already now will only aggravate. So now it's a perfect timing to discuss all these questions, and kudos to the organizers of the event for, again, provoking the discussions, thoughts, and I share Michaela's idea that maybe from the IP perspective, we can also help to improve the regulation of Metaverse and also to shape the Metaverse. So I would like to focus on 3 areas: use of real-world objects, and user license agreements, and in-game assets and in-game currency. I apologize, not specifically the UGC, but you can guess that my favorite book is Cabbages and Kings by Henry, yeah? So the advertising is most important. So for years, as video games companies, we have been struggling with the question of whether we can use real-world objects within the games. Obviously, real-world objects can often include trademarks, copyrights, designs, and there is a question whether use of these real-world objects in realistic video games can still infringe third parties' IP. Many companies, many countries still do not provide clear answer to this question, but at least the United States do, and they have quite consistent case law on this, which is very helpful for video games companies because the United States is at the same time one of the main markets for video games. So the solution they provide, as many of you know, is the First Amendment defense. Why does it apply? Because video games are considered to be art. Yeah, so if real world items are used within video games and are artistically relevant and do not explicitly mislead users as to the source of the content, there is no IP infringement. What surprises me now in relation to Metaverse is that there are many discussions that, unlike video games, Metaverses should not be treated as art. These discussions appeared before the MetaBirkin's case, but also after the MetaBirkin's case, which is additionally surprising because in the MetaBirkin's case, where the defendant was accused of sale of NFTs, which include images with Birkin bags, a little bit transformed, the court explicitly said that the First Amendment defense can apply because even these NFTs shall be treated as art. The case was decided against the defendant, but not because NFTs were not treated as art, were not considered by the court to be art, but because the juries decided that consumers could be explicitly misled as to the source of the content. From this perspective, it's additional question, why should we consider Metaverse not as art and deprive Metaverse of the existing exceptions that allow them to use real-world objects? In addition to this, for years, video games have been successful to a big extent thanks to the creativity allowed to the developers. And the possibility to use in realistic games real-world objects actually helps the creativity, right? And do we really expect the Metaverse to require less creativity than video games? That's probably another question that we can consider. And finally, if we treat IP infringements within Metaverse in the same way as we treat IP infringements in real life, this might create inconsistency for legal regulation within Metaverse in general. So I don't think that we are expecting that people who own a plot in Metaverse will try to register it with a local notary. Or if I'm playing a shooter game within Metaverse, that I will need to get a license to get the gun. I'm not going to do all of this. So why IP infringements within Metaverse should be treated in the same way as they're treated in real life? And even if all these questions with the First Amendment defense in the United States are sorted out, it's definitely also a good time for us to see how the practice evolves in other jurisdictions. And maybe it's also a good call for other jurisdictions to answer the question how they approach use of real world objects in virtual worlds and video games in the potential metaverse. The second question I would like to tackle is the end user license agreement as their main governing document within video games. Again, for years, we as video game companies have been relying on the end user license agreement, terms of services, terms and conditions, whatever, as the main tool of how we regulate the relations between publishers and players, but also between the players. So what we do structurally, we say that you, player, are allowed to play the game as long as you comply with all provisions of the end user license agreements and all the documents to which the license agreement refers, including game rules. So if a player offends in an appropriate way another player or uses cheats within the game, we have a clear sanction, ban, and a simple enforcement mechanism. We can ban from our game however we want, technically. Yeah. Again, this is perfect tool, but even with this perfect tool in video games, we've faced quite a lot of problems like enforcement against minors. So it's complicated English word, unconscionability, and so quite a few questions. But if we move with this tool into the metaverse, it doesn't seem to be the same fine for the metaverse. Because if I'm playing World of Tanks and violate a game rule and I'm banned from the game, okay, it's sad, but I can go and play PUBG or Warzone. But if there is just one metaverse, which is actually my second life, and because I violate some rule of the metaverse, I'm immediately banned from this metaverse. To me, it sounds to be a little bit unproportionate. And another thing for us to reflect about now, if it's not ban, what are the enforcement mechanisms within the virtual reality we can offer in case players violate license agreements or whatever it will be. And another benefit now of the end-user license agreement is that however complicated video games are, we still can provide the game rules. There is code, and as we say often, yeah, code is the law. So many things are just technically impossible to be done within video games, right? But if we say that in Metaverse, we will have the same world if we have that we have in our real life, what are we going to describe in the game rules? It will be like alternative legal system, and I won't be able to just accept it so that it demarcates the rights and obligations of both parties as end-user license agreements do. And finally, going to the in-game currency and in-game assets. A big part of it has been covered by Michaela already. Thank you very much, Michaela. I just wanted to focus on the aspect that now most video games license in-game assets and in-game currency in the same way as they license video games themselves. So Fortnite, the ULO of Fortnite, which is probably the most cited end-user license agreement now, explicitly says that in-game currency and in-game assets are licensed to you, yeah, during the term of this agreement. So if Fortnite bans the player, terminates the license agreement, then the player doesn't have any in-game currency or in-game assets within Fortnite any longer. So there are probably many exceptions there, but the idea that it's still licensed. And it's not what we expect for the metaverse. We expect some sort of ownership within metaverse. But how can it be achieved if we move away from the license is not very clear. NFTs can be a good solution, and we can look at end-to-play video games like Gods Unchained, which says that you own in-game items, and actually you buy in-game items for Ethereum, and you can exchange these in-game items within our game, but we are just a platform, so you bear all responsibility for all those exchanges. But now, thanks to the previous hype of NFTs, we understand that it's not such an easy solution as well because of tax reasons, compliance reasons, and actually also IP reasons. So that is it. Thank you very much. Glad to take questions.
Well, Daria, thank you very, very much for that. I've got millions of questions to ask you, but we'll better wait until we've heard from Tom. He's going to answer all the questions.
No pressure. There we go. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. So I started my career as a solicitor. I had a background in computer science and shortly after qualifying really tried to focus my practice on legally complex emerging technologies. So AI, machine learning, the metaverse, and the reality technologies that underpin that, blockchain, Web3, those sorts of things. There's loads of technologies that are fascinating, but not that legally complex. 3D printing is very cool. I don't really care about it that much. But the ones that really challenged the existing legal and regulatory frameworks I thought were fascinating, and so set about trying to carve a practice in that space. I was an average lawyer at best. But having that technical background and skill set meant that we were able to help clients in far more strategic ways than necessarily just the provision of legal services. We kept providing this sort of strategic advice, and then eventually clients said, well, that sounds great, can you build it for us? At which point I said, yeah, sure, we can do that. And fast forward 2 or 3 years, I looked back at my timesheets and I hadn't done any law in a year. I'd just done this weird, nebulous, techno-legal consulting thing, at which point I turned around internally and said, I think this is a business, give me a shot. If it doesn't work, fire me. If it does, I think we can make a really impactful contribution to our clients and help them navigate all of the exciting and slightly terrifying things that they have to deal with every day when they're dealing with these technologies. And thankfully, they didn't fire me. They said, yeah, go for it. And we haven't looked back since. So today, I run the technology consultancy and engineering arm of Mishcon de Reya, which is a bizarre sentence for a London law firm to say. The team's now quite big. We're about 40 people. I'm the only lawyer in the team. Everyone else is either a software developer, engineer, data scientist, or they are a strategist, designer, product manager, designing and building stuff and strategy for clients. I'm going to now burden you with a 4th definition of the metaverse for this evening. Sorry. I'm going to go big. So for me, the metaverse isn't a technology. It's many technologies are applied within it. You usually involves a reality technology, an AR, VR. Sometimes it's used in conjunction with blockchain and Web3 technologies. But for me, the metaverse isn't a technology, it's a movement. It's a blurring between the physical and the digital. Today, if you want to buy a white t-shirt, you either go in store or you shop online. All the metaverse is using technology to make that online experience feel more physical and experiential. Or that in-person experience feel more experiential and immersive, again, using technology. That's it. It's been called loads of things before. It's been called ad tech. It's been called retail tech. At its heart, it's just about blurring things that were previously entirely physical or entirely digital. I'm also, alongside being running the technology consultancy of the Mishcon Group, on the board of the Institute of Digital Fashion. The irony is not lost on me. So when we're advising large enterprises on their strategy, so we're currently advising Selfridges on their global metaverse strategy, we always start with, why are you doing it? If the answer is to do metaverse, stop doing it. It's a stupid thing to do. Broadly, it breaks down into one of 3 buckets. It's either a brand positioning activity. It's about placing your brand, and this is particularly true in the fashion space, placing your often luxury brand in the environments in which your future consumers or current consumers are, and building that brand association with luxury and prestige. There, from an IP perspective, it's all about thinking about what protections you should be taking and obtaining in that space. I wasn't a very good lawyer, and I wasn't even an IP lawyer, so thankfully I've got a lot of colleagues sat over there who have been inundated over the last 2 years with filings in Class 9 and all of the other metaverse-related protections that you need to take in that respect. So 1, brand positioning. 2, improving the top line, making more money, driving more revenue. In fashion, that's obvious. You can start selling digital clothes, virtual clothes, but that's a slightly base, easy, slightly lazy example of what is interesting in this space. For sports organisations, for example, they have always been constrained. If you go to any Premier League football team on match day, the billboards, they have sold every inch of billboard available to sponsors. Anyone that was following the Qatar World Cup, a number of games, if you put your phone up in stadium, not only did you have the physical world billboards, you had the digital world billboards on your phone. And so they found a new realm into which they could sell and drive revenue. That is potentially very annoying to the sponsor who paid for exclusive rights in stadium, and then they argued that on the phone wasn't in stadium. But it's interesting, and it's a new and novel way in which people are driving revenues in that space. I think from a IP perspective, as soon as it becomes central to revenue streams and top line of a business, we're going to start to see more and more enforcement in that space where people are trying to protect their position and enforce their position. And I think having a good IP disputes lawyer in your camp always helps. And the third, so we've got brand positioning, we've got driving top line, and then we've got improving bottom line by cutting your costs. And here it's much less marketing hype in this space because cutting costs isn't particularly sexy. But in the manufacturing process, I think we're seeing some really interesting metaverse related innovations. Digital twins have been this thing that people have spoken about for a very, very long time, but all of a sudden having digital replicas of physical goods to improve your manufacturing process and your iteration process, which has some sustainability benefits because you're reducing waste, but also has just some pure financial benefits because you're not having to manufacture physical goods all of the time. I think that's really interesting. We obviously we haven't escaped this session without talking about ChatGPT, but stepping away from large language models for a moment and looking at more of the multimodal generative AI, which can generate images and video. That will be interesting from a cost-saving perspective because I don't for a moment think this is the end of human ingenuity. That's just nonsense. I do think it's an accelerant that allows us to focus on the actual ingenious things that haven't been thought about. And from an IP perspective, it will be much brighter lawyers than I can help talk about the IP implications of that. But from a business point of view, I think the generative AI revolution will be great. It will cut costs in many ways. I then just wanted to quickly make a bit of a case for innovation. I think it's the argument that we should stop and slow down and put in safeguards because of risk is such an intoxicating argument. It seduces you because logically it seems like a no-brainer. Oh my goodness, there's risk. We need to put things in place to stop it. I also think there's no end to that. You can keep putting in place more and more safeguards until eventually we just stop doing anything interesting. And so I do think there is a balance to be struck and a responsible middle path through where people are both enabled and permitted to innovate and do interesting things while also taking some protective mitigating steps. I think OpenAI did a pretty good job with ChatGPT. They've had all sorts of headlines criticizing them for its inaccuracy and some and various incidents where people have managed to work around it to make it say harmful things, etc. But they released a relatively low. We're not monitoring a drone in a war zone here or making clinical decisions over people's health. It's a relatively safe product that they released in a drip feed fashion. They very, very quickly took remedial action and made fixes as things were uncovered. And there isn't a great deal of harm. I think it's a pretty good example of a company trying to bake in safeguards, taking steps to remediate, and ultimately launching something that everyone's talking about and using. I think they did a pretty good job. Also, on the video earlier, it said the metaverse is a world without rules. That person doesn't know how programming works. It's maths. It's literally rules. It might be different rules to the one that we have here, and it's obviously there's a big conversation to be had around who writes the rules and what are those rules. But it has got rules. It's maths. There's no way around that. That's literally how it works. Another thing we hear spoken about a lot is this sort of fear of this ubiquitous and therefore dystopian world in which the world is run by a single independent company. I I just don't think that's not how innovation works and how innovation is funded. Fortnite is never going to allow you to port all of your assets to another game publisher's platform. Why would they? They want you on Fortnite. I've seen a number of people advocating for a ubiquitous loyalty scheme where all of your loyalty points from BA is transferable to your loyalty points from Ryanair. That's not how loyalty works. That's promoting disloyalty. and so I do think we're still going to see a number of silos within the ecosystem, and I think that's a good thing, and I think there's a challenge for competition regulators to make sure that they are maintaining sufficient space between those actors. But the idea that the world's going to be run by Metaverse Inc. is nonsense. I'll finish with some predictions, if you will indulge me. So from a tech perspective, hardware is still king, and it will get cheaper. Interesting, you don't want to wear a headset. If I could embed it in those glasses, bet you'd use it.
Great, no, that's fine.
And that will become more and more possible, and cheaper and cheaper to enact. So from a tech perspective, fascinated to see how hardware works. The undisputed king of the hardware jungle, Apple, is going to release its headset in the next couple of months, and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like and how it works. The one of, if not the most successful internet services company, Meta. You can say what you. I have some very strong personal opinions about the corrosive impact of Meta on our democracy and society. But they are solving technology problems that nobody else has got to solve. They are dealing with 500 million concurrent users. The advances that they will make in the metaverse space, even their leavings that they don't bother to protect, will move us forward from an engineering perspective like not many, if any, company in the world can. Commercially, the reason Disney has no longer got a metaverse department is the same reason that Clifford Chance hasn't got a law department. It's the whole gig. They call it the next generation of storytelling, the next great frontier of storytelling. Disney's a storytelling company. Of course, they don't have a metaverse department. They're a metaverse company. They've arguably had the biggest metaverse experience going for about 70 years. It's called Disneyland. It's just a fever dream metaverse implementation and has been for ages. They are still the golden light, the shining light of how to do storytelling and using technology to do that more impactfully, and they're going to keep doing that. And I think more brands will realize that metaverse isn't just a thing you do in innovation theatre, but it's central to driving your brand or your top line or your bottom line, or all three. And then legally, I think the English law legal system is a beautiful thing. I think we are, I mean, nerdiest thing I've ever said. But it has this ability to adapt and deal with new innovations. The Law Commission recently concluded that no major legislative reform has to come into place in order to make smart contracts enforceable at English law. That's mental. How on earth can a 1,000-year-old legal system be able to deal with a new form of automatically enforced contracting without needing to change it? I think that's an incredible thing we should be proud of, and I think we're all very lucky to have it. We'll see more emerging best practice that isn't just the law, but is what consumers expect. And we'll see more enforcement, because when things get valuable, people want to sue each other over it, and I think, bring it on. Final thing, I think, Michaela, you mentioned the new class of property, English law, that they're talking about in the context of crypto assets. Anne over there is helping to write it, so you could go and speak to her if you're interested afterwards. Thank you.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for that. I don't know what to say about English law being a beautiful thing. I think we can all agree about that, I hope.
3 cheers for English law.
3 cheers for English law. Just because this is a law institute, I thought I'd start the discussion a little bit, having heard these 4 fascinating talks, with a slightly legalistic question. And I'd be very interested to hear the panelists' views on it, because do my best to try and cut across everything that has been said. we are trying to think, at least to some extent, about how law interacts with this metaverse thing. And we know from the way that the internet, in a traditional sense, I mean, it's crazy to even think there's such a thing as the traditional internet. I mean, how extraordinary that is. But we know how that works, at least to some extent. And the particular thing I'm interested in is that, and this is an English law thing, started here anyway, is that if you ask the question, what law applies to some event, some thing on the internet, we know the answer in this jurisdiction, and in many other countries now, that you ask the question, is the website directed to this country? If the website is directed to this country, then we can apply our IP laws to it. We can apply other laws, tort laws. I did a case recently in the Court of Appeal where we were applying consumer law to a website that was at least to some extent directed to this country. So we've crafted a concept of the idea of a website being directed to this country as a trigger to allow this jurisdiction's law to apply. I mean, that doesn't mean other jurisdictions don't apply too. That's a problem. But at least we know that we can deal with that sort of thing in this country that way. Now, in the metaverse, I'm just imagining that whether it's I've donned a pair of specs that's the VR headset that I'm prepared to tolerate, and I'm now navigating some kind of virtual world where I'm dodging tanks from World of Tanks while jumping into a virtual John Lewis to go and buy myself a virtual Gucci t-shirt to wear while I'm dodging tanks in World of Tanks. And I want to buy a Gucci t-shirt. Gucci clearly wants some control over a virtual shop in the metaverse called Gucci. So they want to register a trademark for virtual t-shirts. Can you even do that? I don't know. That's a question I'd like to answer. But more broadly, is there an analog to this directing the website, can you direct the metaverse to a place? How are we going to solve the problem of knowing whose law, never mind what the content of that law is, but how do we even decide that? Any thoughts? Michaela, what do you think?
My mind is still full of this image of virtual John Lewis and Gucci t-shirt. I think the answer is that it's going to be increasingly more difficult to come up with this kind of legal fiction solution on how to localize whether it's the particular user where they are based, or it's the particular content that they are interacting with, or it's the potential harm that is being caused and where it's being felt. And last but not least, often some of these questions are sidestepped by the fact that there is a license agreement in place, and a lot of the legal issues are covered or directed to specific jurisdiction that is the choice of law under the agreement, and that it has to be decided that perhaps the agreement or parts of the provisions are not enforceable, like Daria was mentioning earlier. And then, in the absence of an enforceable provision, looking for a particular jurisdiction that would address that. But I think also from the perspective of the user, even being able to navigate that or determine which potential law or whether there is a possibility to hear the case in their own jurisdiction, I think that can be quite difficult. And just to add to that, we do have, I think, 2 cases in the UK that deal with NFTs and whether they can be considered property under the UK law for the purposes of seeking legal remedy after the NFTs were stolen. And even though the courts ruled that yes, it can be considered property under existing law, I'm not sure whether the legal remedy has had an actual effect, because the order could not be directed to anyone specific because because of the anonymity within the context of the environment. So in order to retrieve the stolen items, you would have to rely on the voluntary compliance of the platform, from
Right.
which was facilitating the token. So I think there's a big question of efficiency, even though we may have laws that may apply, and a court is willing to hear the case and they will decide in your favor. Would you actually do with it in the metaverse or in the digital environment? What practical implications these rights that were established in the real world,
Yep.
what do they mean
How do they mean?
in the metaverse?
Well, maybe Daria, could you tell us? I mean, if Gucci came along and complained to you that one of your players, some so-called judge, was jumping around in World of Tanks and had sneaked into a Gucci T-shirt shop, and he was based in the UK, would you accept the UK law was going to apply to that sort of situation? How would you see it from your company's point of view?
So do you mean Gucci would sue the company or the player, and whether they will be sued in the UK? So where is the forum in your question?
Yes.
So they would try to sue in the UK, yeah?
Yeah.
And they are suing the player or us?
Well, let's say they're suing both. Because they want justice.
I understand. So for players, one of the provisions in game rules is that players should not violate third parties' IP. So if, for example, a player creates a mod which allows them to put on Gucci T-shirt, we will ban the mod and potentially can even ban the player because he has violated the game rules. And to Gucci, we will say that, we have these rules. Once we learn that there is such a case, we removed it immediately, and we really will hope that nobody will sue us. However, if there is a potential another video gaming company which has no relation to us and which provides such a functionality as selling Gucci T-shirts to their players and monetize them, and Gucci wants to sue them, I think that Gucci would probably go to the country where this video gaming company is established to make the whole process a little bit easier, if the laws in this country are good enough for it. Yeah. Otherwise, they will try to do some forum shopping, and if they try to go to the UK, of course, one of the arguments will be to challenge that that potential company. Arguments will be that the UK law should apply. It will depend on the players. We've had cases in the United States, many companies try to protect their rights to video games in clone case, for example, in California, because there is a lot of case law there. And there are quite a few cases where the Californian case law courts would deny jurisdiction because the amount of players in that district is very small, or in California state is very small.
Interesting. Thank you, Daria. Tom, what do you think the answer is?
I think this jurisdiction shopping conversation has most clearly been borne out in the distributed systems market, so the blockchain market, where a distributed network of computers are maintaining a network, and that network could be global and everywhere. Generally, actors, certainly 5 years ago, were arguing that we are everywhere and therefore we are nowhere. Regulators generally said, that's cute, but no. And they've used all sorts of different ways to determine where is the proper jurisdiction to judge a system in. They've followed the money. Where does the money land in a fiat real bank account? There's a credible argument that if it's all in a New York bank account, probably should be New York law. They've looked at code contributions, so who has built this thing actually? If the IP for every code commit is in India, argument that India should be the proper jurisdiction. Where are the users? If great, it was built in Timbuktu, but all of the users are in London, it's a London product from a regulatory perspective. And then where is the control and the decision making, in the same way as we've been tax citus for a very long time. There's a consultation out at the moment from the Treasury, which is interesting. It's one of the first examples I've seen of the UK taking quite a US approach to extraterritoriality, which is you can be wherever you want, but provided you market into the UK, we're going to regulate you here as well. That concerns me slightly in an increasingly global world. Does that therefore mean that companies are going to have to take advice in every single jurisdiction in which they have a user? I find that troubling. But I think for me, the Metaverse conversations about jurisdictional shopping, the answer is being sought most clearly in distributed systems.
Thank you. Stephen, how is anybody going to trust any of this if we've got all this forum shopping and Timbuktu and everything else?
I'm glad you left me till last so I could write down some bullshit answer. So, I mean, I actually wrote down trust because I was thinking that I was really taken by that idea of the Metaverse being this kind of like blurring, moving thing that is kind of in a process of being settled. And there are still so many tensions that we're thinking about territory, jurisdiction. How do we characterize this space? Is it a public commons? Is it property? Can it be owned? If it's potentially infinite, how can value be generated? That type of thing. I think one of the key tensions is this idea of sort of the fantasy of universality that the Metaverse kind of promises, and then the hard realities that we face when human beings try to work together and collaborate and do things. Immediately when I'm thinking about jurisdictions, I'm thinking about geopolitical tensions. So, maybe if this technology had arrived 20, maybe even 10 years ago, and we were sort of on this kind of global trajectory, we would have said, yeah, this is really possible. And now when you think about even basic tensions between China, the West, obviously Russia, it really problematizes some of these ideas because, interests are being increasingly protected rather than before where it felt like we could collaborate on almost anything. So that's my bullshitty answer. I hope you got something out of that because I don't know about international law and intellectual property, but there are my free association thoughts on it.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That's helpful. Look, now it's your turn. Questions from the audience? Yes, gentlemen there. I don't know how we're doing microphones. Have we got a? Or can you? Do we have a? Oh, thank you. Great.
Great, thank you.
Am I stuck here now? I'm stuck here now.
I'm fascinated at these Metaverse talks about what I'm thinking of as the singularization of the Metaverse. It's always there's one of them that's built into everything, and that strikes me as, I don't know if that's just shorthand for let's just keep it simple, or is this a load of naivety? But it seems to confuse people. It definitely confuses me. Presumably, there's going to be lots of them. We've already got the inklings of lots of them, that are different online worlds that are out there. There's perhaps going to be a Chinese one. Perhaps Apple may or may not want to have their own, I don't know. Perhaps some tech companies might want to create a consortium. There might be a rival consortium. Yet a lot of the discussion is about, I think, a sort of a utopian ideal that we might create because it doesn't exist yet. So I'm interested to what people think. Is there going to be one? Are there going to be rival ones? Are people interested in some sort of either a treaty organization to set up some sort of jurisdiction, choice of law sort of thing which works for everyone? Or would this be something where we'd have a standardization body which deals with this like they do with other technology things? I sort of feel there's a whole conversation to be had about which metaverse we're talking about, or are there lots of them? I'm just curious do people have sort of baked-in assumptions about this, or are they still open to different thoughts?
Well, before I pass it to the other panel members, let me just react in a couple of ways, because I think what you raised there is, it's a very interesting issue. And one of the things which, from my perspective as someone who has litigated and judged too many telecoms patents, I could happily stop doing telecoms patents. I've done enough of them, but I've done a lot. And it feels a little bit like we're in the same situation with this Metaverse communication tool as we were with digital telephony about 30 years ago, because there was the possibility of a balkanized, it wasn't just a possibility, people were building independent digital telephone networks which were never going to talk to each other. And my understanding is that it was a European effort at a government level and with industry to create this standardization concept where you created a single standard, and one of the critical pieces of it was interoperability, and the idea that you would only have one system which everybody could build their kit and connect to, and have these standard essential patents. So I've been wondering whether the answer is MUPPETS. Here is a new acronym for you, MUPPETS. It stands for Metaverse, Unitary Patents, and Patents which are essential to technology standards. MUPPETS. But seriously, maybe that's a solution. But I don't know, Tom, you've got the solution. You seem to have the solutions for most problems. So what's the answer to this one?
I think there's going to be loads. I think that if we think about just how broad this concept of the metaverse is, it would be like saying, is there going to be one technology? It's like it's so multifaceted that I can't envisage a world in which there is one. I would love to think they're all interoperable. I don't believe that's how innovation is funded and money is made. I think it is good for the world that there are many.
Okay. Yeah?
I just want to go back to the example that you were referring to, the telecommunication industry and the sort of success of interoperability and standards.
Yeah.
I think while it is a useful example, there are some limitations in terms of sort of complexity. I think thinking about the metaverse and the underlying infrastructure there, the scope is such. I think it's unlikely that we will see a repeat of the telecommunication industry success in interoperability, which basically means that whatever phone you have, it will work around the world. Obviously, you need to deal with roaming, etc., depending on what your provider contract says. But my phone purchased in one country will function exactly the same way anywhere around the globe.
And your phone will phone me anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I must say that in kind of thinking how many and what kind of metaverses we might have in the future, I am on the sort of same part of the spectrum as Tom here. I think it's very unlikely we would have a single ubiquitous, united space that we could all occupy, inhabit, and experience in the same way. We already do not have a singular internet. What I can view and search for depends on the kind of country I am in. We have different maps, we have different information, we have completely different sort of parts of the internet that can or may not be accessed. And because of this difference in values, in culture, I don't think it's even possible to have a singular space for everyone, because there isn't a single standard that would be accepted by all different citizens, all different countries around the world. And this is not even linking it back to technology, but staying or focusing on the sort of cultural aspect and social values. I think it is not a feasible solution.
But even if we were to take the metaverse not in its totality, but just take a social media absolutely can be interoperable, they just don't want it to be. When Facebook was starting up, they used to have an open API. When they didn't have dominance, you could create a blog and embed your Facebook wall on that page. And they did that because they weren't yet dominant and they wanted to be as many places as possible. The moment they were dominant, they shut that API down because they no longer wanted you off platform, they wanted you on the platform. And so it's possible I don't think it's possible in its totality, but in individual verticals or horizontals or whatever Facebook is, it's possible, they just don't want to because that's not how money works.
Yeah. Stephen, I mean, to some extent, this is another way of looking at conspiracies, because if you arrange everybody to get together, then you're going to be right on your radar.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how do we solve that?
I mean, the question that keeps coming up for me is the use case. You know, we're thinking about this from, you know, it's like you have to be convinced and you have to really think about it. Okay, so what is the value of the metaverse, or, you know, these various ways that this persistent virtual world or worlds or platforms can be used? And it's like, oh yeah, no, I can see how it can, you know, it can be useful and valuable in these different ways. You take something like telephone communication, it's immediately clear how people can benefit and how you can monetize that. Yeah. And I think that might be part of the problem, right? You know, and maybe you could say, like, social media, when we look back, we can say right now we can see this, but it's like we're trying to project forward what the metaverse is going to be. And part of the unique selling point of the idea of the metaverse is this universality, right? That it is this kind of one place where all of these different things can plug into. So I would be less convinced about the sort of cohesive idea of the value and the cohesive idea of what it can bring to people when it loses that and it starts becoming fragmented into these various different kind of use cases and different ideas. And I think we also lose sight of the user, the public, and what they're getting out of it. It's like, okay, right, I can see how Gucci or, you know, these other firms or organizations could benefit from this, but, you know, what is it that is bringing value to the users that will, you know, one day supposedly be making use of this in huge numbers?
Yeah.
If I can just add to that, I think it's really...
Very quickly. We've got to go to Daria, find out what she wants, and then we've got one more question from the audience, and I think we'll probably run out of time.
Which is really interesting is that a lot of the sort of advertising or projecting of what the metaverse can be is still targeted at the right holders, right? At the brands, at the companies that will be exploiting their IP. And I think the message may be a little bit missed when it comes to the actual user, the digital citizen, because a few people have asked me, okay, and this metaverse, what is the value? What will I make of this? What will it bring me that I already don't have through, you know, all the variety of different platforms and virtual environments? And I think a good parallel is NFTs. The value of, you know, investing via NFTs and generating profit. I think a lot of users, they don't want to invest. They just want to play or experience.
And with that perfect segue into Daria, who's our tank playing expert. I mean, from your company's point of view, would it be better to have one metaverse interoperable or a whole host of them? Or you couldn't go?
I just wanted to say that I want to switch now my legal part off and also my wargaming part off, but you don't allow me to. So actually, before this question, I was always thinking about one metaverse, because this is what all the books depict to us. But Steven has very rightly mentioned political reasons, and because of just political reasons, I don't think that it will be just one metaverse, right? Some countries will probably want to have something of their own. And, you know, there is also an interesting aspect going to the question of what users want. Users come to video games often to try being someone else. So I go to Hogwarts Legacy and I want to look like Hermione Granger, and I go to World of Tanks and I want to be Arnold Schwarzenegger and drive Leopard tank. So in different games, I have these different personalities. And if there is just one metaverse, will it mean that it always same boring me or my same boring avatar? Yeah.
Never boring. Right. Have we got time for one more question? Yes? Right. Yes, one more question from the audience. Oh, okay. Oh, yes, the lady up there, please.
I really want to see the Hermione Granger crossover in World of Tanks.
I've got that image, exactly that, with a little wand sticking out the top of the tank. Yes.
Thanks very much. This has been a really interesting talk. I apologise if this is a very stupid question because I'm neither a computer scientist nor a lawyer. But I'm interested in when you touched on standards and standard essential patents, because that is something that's been a big conversation in Brussels at the moment. There's a sort of revamping of the standardization policy there, and we're looking at a proposal to regulate standard essential patterns. My question is, how well equipped do you think regulators overall are to look into making sure that there's good interoperability within metaverses or a metaverse? And what provisions, what do you think would need to be in a piece of legislation if it was going to be factoring in a metaverse situation?
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think the model that we were talking about, of the telecoms development of an interoperable communication system, one of the clever things, accidental or clever things about it wasn't one that the regulators created. It was one that the industry, with the assistance of government, created for itself. And the pooling of the ideas from the different tech companies, they saw enough of it, the system was structured cleverly enough that there was enough advantage from their perspective to get together and outstrip any of the individuals and build a better communication system. I mean, originally the 2G system was better than anything else anybody had. And they managed to keep ahead of the game by innovating again in 3G, again in 4G, and again in 5G. And so you never needed to have a regulator come along and say, this is how you must do it. So if we want to do it for metaverses, if that's the only way we can have this idea of at least some kind of single meta. You don't have to take your loyalty points from Fortnite to World of Tanks, even if you have an interoperable metaverse. But if we want to do that, what we have to find is a way in which we can convince Apple and Facebook and everybody else that it's actually in their commercial interest to pool their ideas. And Tom will tell us that that's not going to happen. But that's the only answer I can think of to your question. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I don't think it will happen. I just don't think it is in their commercial best interest. I don't see how it possibly can be. How equipped do I think regulators are? I think it's very difficult to take regulators in a single bucket. I think some regulators are extremely progressive and forward-thinking and have worked very, very hard to build their internal capability and know-how. Others have not. And that is true in every jurisdiction, so you've got a lot of regulators all of a sudden. I think the examples of the ones that have done best, I think the FCA has done a reasonably good job in that they are regulating, that they're trying to not make it too rule. They're trying to be quite outcomes based, which is therefore more agnostic to what the tech is at any one point, because the tech today is going to be yesterday's technology tomorrow.
Okay, Tom, we're running out of time, so I'm going to cut you off if you don't mind.
Please.
One last comment from each panel member. You can say what you like, but what I'd like to know is, are you an optimist or a pessimist for this? Michaela?
A realist.
Stephen?
Yeah, my last parting thing would be, I think it needs to be publicly accountable. So not only, regulated by the commercial interests, but also by the public more broadly. So I would be an optimist if we can do that.
Okay, Dario?
I hope that we create metaverse which will benefit people, and players and participants, not just that God on the earth. And if it is so, then I'm optimistic.
Thank you. And Tom?
I'm an optimist.
Great. Well, look, thank you very, very much for that. It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you.